Hey Blender people, my name is Keith and I'm going to do a real quick and dirty, I guess you could call this a tutorial. It's my very first time trying, so be patient please. And what it's about is this flashing light. Very simple scene, nothing fancy, which was what I was looking for over the weekend, and that's why I'm doing this, because I couldn't find anything simple. I found Christmas tree lights, I found lights flashing on one of those old movie style computers that you saw like on Star Trek and all the rest, but just a very simple blinking flashing light. I just couldn't find any kind of tutorial for that, so I decided, once I finally figured out how to do it, I decided to go ahead and throw together something that maybe might help somebody down the line who finds himself in the tall weeds like I was over the weekend. So without further ado, let's get started. But this is what we want to end up with, just a simple flashing light. So here we are in Blender, default scene. Let's click on the cube, get rid of it, delete. Let's bring up our screencast keys, which will work sometimes. It's real sometimey, and maybe other people are having the same kind of problem with theirs, but we'll see. We'll muddle through. Okay, the first thing we want to do is let's go into the front view, which is numpad 1. Shift A to bring in a new mesh, and the new mesh is going to be a UV sphere. We want to make it a very simple UV sphere. We don't need 32 segments, so we click on that, take it down to 16. Alrighty, and next move is to do what? Let's set up our camera real quick. So we're looking at it straight on, which is all I want to do. Very simple, very sweet. And to do that, we're looking straight at it, so we go Control Alt 0, and that brings us into the straight on view of the camera. Let's hit Home, and let's bring back our side panel over here. The name of the panel escapes me right now. We want the view. We want to lock the camera view, which is right there, and then we want to roll the middle mouse key, so we put our circle kind of way in the background there, and that's good enough. Okay, click in to get rid of that side panel, and let's come out of the camera view. Now we can zoom in without changing that camera view, and now we want to go to setting up a material, because that's one of the keys to this whole thing. Okay, one other thing before I do that, let's go over to where it says sphere, double click it and change it to, let's give it the name bulb. It's a good idea to get into the habit of naming your stuff as you go along, especially when you start getting into these very complex projects and you start forgetting what's what. So let's go into getting this thing a material. We're going to go into the shading window, or the shading workspace, and we're going to go down to material, click on that, click on new, and voila, we have down in our shading editor, we have the PBR shader and we have the material output. We don't want PDR, so control right click, cut that, click on it, X to get rid of it, and let's bring in, we want 3 different shaders. Shift A, H for shader, and the first shader we want to bring is a mix shader. Set that right there. Next shader we want to bring in is a emission shader, so H for shader and then E for emission. And then the next shader we want to bring in, Shift A, H for shader, and what are we going to bring in? We're going to bring in a transparent, so that's N. We'll bring that up. We plug our shaders into our mix shader, emission up top, and the transparent at the bottom, and then we go from shader to surface. Okay, and right now that gives us a white ball, a white bulb, because the color of our emission is white, but we're going to change that. Let's bring it down to red. Yeah, flashing red. Okay, and then we go over to, let's see, while we've got our object selected, let's go into edit mode and assign Make sure we got the whole thing selected. I turn on my X-ray because when I box select, I want to make sure I've got the whole thing, front and back. All right, go back to that number 1 view. And now that we know we've got it selected, we go over to here where it says Assign and just click on Assign. And let's change the name while we're at it. Name of the material, we're going to call that, let's call it red bulb. Be a little bit different from what we called the mesh. Okay, next thing we want to do is zoom in on the mix shader and look at this little factor slider. Okay, right now the slider is right in the middle at 0.5. If we slide it all the way to 0, you don't see much of a change. But if we slide it all the way up to 1, our ball goes black. But we don't want the ball to go black, we want the ball to disappear. So let's go back up into object mode. And if we go down to settings, where it says blend mode, right now it says opaque, we want to take it to alpha hashed. And where it says shadow, we want to make that none, because we don't want the light to have a shadow, we just want it to blink off and on. Okay, so now at 1 the light is gone, and at 0 it's back. And because we have an emission shader, it's emitting. But we've got our strength down pretty low, so let's take it up to like maybe 10. Okay. And either in the full off position or in the full on position, we take it to one of the two, because that's going to be our keyframe. We're only going to add one keyframe at the very beginning of the timeline, and that is going to be, in my case, I'm going to start it off at 0 where the light is on. So I right click inside the factor slider and insert keyframe, and that takes care of that. Now we can go into another workspace, which is going to be the animation workspace. I'm hoping that I'm not forgetting anything in the meantime, but here we are. Okay, we're in animation. We don't want the dope sheet down here, we want the graph editor. Okay, and then right here where the select arrow is, for some reason it's got to be off. I don't know why, but maybe I got a bum copy of Blender, but anyway, it has to be off in order for this to show up. Let me do that again. When it's on, there's nothing over here. Turn it off and we get this. And what we want to do is go under bulb, and under the material we have red bulb, and we click on that and we get the the shader node tree. We click on that and we get what we're looking for, which is the default factor. And that's what we've keyframed, that default factor, which was in my case 0 on the slider on the, what do you call it, the mix shader. Okay, then we go over here and we hit N for the little side panel that comes up over here, and we want to go to, what do we want to go to? We want to look over here on the side where we have F curve, we have modifiers, and we have view. Too hot, too cold, just right. Modifier is what we want. We click on modifier, and then when we add modifier, and the modifier we're looking for is the built-in function. Built-in function default is a sine curve, which, boom, voila, appears on our screen. If we hit the space bar, which starts our animation, and we go up here, and what we get is a flashing light. Off and on, but it's flashing very, very fast, because our phase is pretty fast, pretty high. All scrunched together like that. It's pretty high, but we want to stretch it out. We want to make it a little slower blinking. So we go over to the phase multiplier. Right now it's at 1. We want to take it down to about 0.25, and you see it stretched out the sine curve. And then we want to increase the amplitude, which kind of increases the brightness of the light. When it flashes on, we want it to be as bright as, we want it to be a bit brighter than what we're seeing. So we multiply that by a factor of, let's say, 10. Okay, and as you can see, it got so tall and so deep that it went off the screen a little bit. So we hit Control, middle key, and scroll down a little bit. Not scroll, but just drag down. Drag down and drag in, And there we have. We haven't changed the amplitude. The amplitude is still at 10. We've just squeezed it for our view, for the purposes of our view, but it hasn't changed the actual value. Okay, so let's go back. Shift left arrow to go back to the beginning of the timeline or the beginning of the animation. Hit the space bar and voila. Now that light is turning a little bit white. It's going past red and getting real it's going to white. That means it's burning a little too hot. So let's take this down to, let's say 5. Okay, go back to the beginning, shift left arrow. Okay, I'll live with that. I know what the problem is. It's the if we go back to the material and we go to the emission, open that up. That's another thing too. You can, if you want to, I don't know anybody who does it this way, but if you want to, you can control your material from this side panel here, rather than going into the shading, you know, rather than going over here. So what I need to do over here is take this down, this factor down to 5.0. But like I was saying, I interrupted myself. You can either change your materials over here in the shade editor, or you can go over here on the side and do the exact same changes. You see where I went to 5 on the strength. I did it over here, but it shows up over here. I could have done it either way. So let's go back to the animation again. And now let's take our amplitude up to 10 again. And this way, I think maybe still kind of bright. Okay, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to get bogged down in that. Let's try 3. That's a little bit better. All right. Okay, so really we could stop here because all I wanted to do was get the flashing light, but we're going to add a little bit more to give it a Starfield background, you know, make it a little bit fancy, But this is the key. The key is you go into when you've added the material, you set it up like this, and you want to go to your mix shader, the factor, set it to one extreme or the other. Put a keyframe at the very beginning of the animation or the timeline, and then you go into your animation and you play around with this button until this side panel shows up. And when that shows up, this side panel shows up, and what you want to go to is the modifiers. You want to add a modifier, and the what you want to add is the built-in function, which is the sine wave, and then you can adjust it accordingly to fit what you're trying to do. Amplitude makes it taller and deeper, and phase either stretches it out or scrunches it in and makes things move faster. It gives you a higher frequency or a lower frequency. And that really is what this tutorial is all about. But before we get out of here, we're going to give this thing a background. So let's go back to the shading workspace, and instead of dealing with an object, we're going to deal with the world. So we need to add a couple more nodes. Shift A. First node we want to add is a texture node, T, and the texture node we're looking for is noise. And then we want to add, Shift A, we want to add a color ramp. Search. Click S and you'll get the search window, and just type in color and you get color ramp. Set that there. Put our factor from the noise texture into the factor on the color ramp. Go from color on the color ramp to the color input of the background. Then we go up to render view at the top. That's very important. Very important. And then we play with our noise. Let's see, yeah, there we go. Sometimes on my system, I don't know if it'll be that way with yours, but sometimes you get nothing but a gray screen, and you have to, and what I have to do is grab my mouse, click and hold my middle mouse key, and then turn it a little bit, and then the noise will show up. Right now it looks like a very cloudy, foggy day, but we're going to change that. We want to take our scale up to 155. I picked this up from another YouTuber I'm not a YouTuber, but I picked this up from a YouTuber who does tutorials, and I am sorry, but I don't remember your name, so I can't give you the credit that you deserve, but I got it from another YouTuber. Let's just crank the detail up a little bit and the distortion just a little bit. And then to make the magic, make the stars come out, we grab this slider on the color ramp, the black slider, and we bring it over. And what we're telling what we're telling Blender is that any color in this screen that is darker than what's to be found on the right side of the slider, any color darker than that is going to go completely to black. So as we bring it over, more and more of those colors will go black. More and more of the grays will go black. And then we bring this in to make what's left a little bit brighter. Okay, if we bring up the details, those stars get a little sharper, a little more pinpoint, and the distortion will kind of spread things out a little bit. And let's bring that in a little bit more, have some fewer stars right there. That looks about right. Okay. All right. Another thing we want to do is click on the noise texture. If you don't have it already activated, what you can do, the next thing I'm going to use is the I think it's called the Node Wrangler. I think that's what it's, some kind of Wrangler. I think it's the Node Wrangler, but don't get me to line. We go up to Edit, Preferences, and then it's an add-on. We type in the search window. I think it's Wrangler with a W-R. Yeah, Node Wrangler is what it is. Now I've already got it set up, so you click it and it's already set up by default. So I'm not going to change. I don't have to do anything, but just to give you a heads up. Now once you've got it activated, then you can go over to this node, the noise texture, and we can add by going Control T. We add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node, and this can come in handy for your background. And one of the ways it can become handy is in the following way. Okay, if we go down to, let's bring that up a little bit. If we go down to the rotation, let's go down to the Z rotation and watch what happens when I right click, hold down, and turn, and just slide across, and you can see that the background spins. So that's what we want to do. Let's take it back to 0 first. Now let's right click, insert keyframe. Okay, and then we want to go to the end of the timeline by holding down Shift and hitting right arrow. And if you'll notice up here, it's kind of sneaky, but if you notice up here, it went to 250. My timeline by default, all Blender timelines by default are set at 250 frames. So by hitting Shift and right arrow key on my keyboard, it took us to frame 250. If you want to know what frame you're on without having to add a timeline in here, there it is right there. So if we go down just a couple of frames to 248, and then we go down to our Z rotation, and let's take it like maybe 15 degrees. So over the span, wait, let me stop. Take it to 15 degrees. Before you leave, you right click on it and insert keyframe. So now, over the span of the 250 frames of this animation, the background is going to spin about 15 degrees. And that's what that does. It just adds a little something to it. Okay, so let's go back. Something. Yeah, that's a scientific term. Let's go back to what? Right up here. I don't know what this thing is called, but this is where you find out, well, I guess might be the render tab. But you set up what kind of render you're going to do. In this case, it's going to be EV. And by default, you should get into the habit. Another habit you should have is when you're in EV, make sure that ambient occlusion is clicked, and make sure bloom, well, I like to have bloom. See what happened when I turned on bloom? That light just started to grow magnificently. just warms the heart. But there's some other stuff that you want to play around with in here too. But these are the two, or this is the one actually that you really want to. The bloom, yeah, I would say the bloom is default too, because the bloom just adds more to it. It just gives it more life. Anyway, now that we've set that up, I'm not going to go into the other stuff because that's not what this tutorial is about. Let's go to the default view or layout view. Let's go to rendered and let's hit 0 on the numpad key to take us to the camera view, and shift left key to go back to the very beginning of the timeline. We hit the space bar, and voila, there's our animation. And that was all to get the blinking light, a very simple blinking light. I had a space scene, and I had a ship that was kind of like just orbiting this planet, and I wanted the ship to have a flashing light. Why would you put a flashing light on a spaceship? No reason. It just, to me, it just looked good. And I could not find any tutorials that gave you just a very simple explanation about how to do a simple flashing off and on light. And so since I couldn't find one, I decided maybe I'll make my contribution to the Blender community and I will create one. So if you find yourself in the tall weeds like I was over the weekend, you stumble across this video, I hope it helps. And that's pretty much it. I can't think of anything else to waste your time with, so I will get out of here. Peace, and I'm gone.